Hello everyone and welcome back to our series of Learning to Code with P5. Today in this video, we will learn how to create our own functions. Functions are something that we have been working with from before, but the difference in this one is that we will learn to create our own. So let's get started. Okay, so first things first, just make sure that you have already remixed your project. I've already done so. You've given it a name. Always try to remix your project from the blank sketch. It's just much more easier. Anyway, so moving on to our functions, right? Like what exactly are functions? Do we know them? Have we worked with them before? And the answer is yes, we have been working with functions. If you notice that we have our setup function, we have our draw function. Well, we also made use of our resize window function as well. So what exactly are functions and why are we using them? So first of all, we know that setup and draw functions are super important just because our sketch will not work without them, right? Anything that goes in the setup function is going to happen once, and then anything that happens in draw keeps on running continuously, right? That we know of. But these are not the only functions that we've been working with before. So if you look at this like background, this in itself is a function. There are lots and lots of more functions, like we've been working with circles, rectangles, lines, random, radians, some formula related like distance, etc. So these are all functions as well. The thing is, or the difference is, that these functions have already been pre-made for us and they reside in P5's dictionary library, right? That it understands. So all we do is just pull those functions out and try to use them when we need them, wherever we need them, and try to, create a more customized version of it as well. So today what we will try to do is try to create our own functions so that we can call our own functions when we need them and use them. What it will do is basically it will help us optimize our code. So that's not a surprise because we have been trying to optimize our code ever since we have started to learn coding, right? Because think about it. So initially we started working with some existing functions, of course, but then we also started working with existing variables like mouse X and mouse Y and, those kind of things. But then we realized that, if we want to have more control, we need to actually create our own variables. So we ended up creating our variables so that we can customize them. Then think about it. When we created our own variables, we realized that, okay, we should try to avoid repetition or writing certain lines of code again and again. How can we optimize that? So that's where our loop function came in handy, right? Then we thought about, okay, if we are able to create one variable, how can we create multiple variables and control them? And that's where we started working with arrays. So today in this video, we will try, what we are doing is not something separate in terms of like learning blocks, but what we are trying to do is through our functions, we are able to pre-package them in a certain like organized way where our chunks of code can reside in a certain function, and when they are called, they will actually perform or do the task for us. So let's get started. First things first. Okay, I'm going to try and do an example, something that we've been doing before, like we are able to create a circle and then we can move it around, right? Okay, that's something we know. What we know is that means that we need to create certain kind of variables. If you want to have a quick revision, I'm going to take it fast, but then if you want, you can always go back and watch the previous videos to get as an idea of how we have been doing it in the past. So all right, so we know that we will need X and Y variables for the position, the center position of our circle, and then we will need a couple of variables that will control the speed of the X on the X coordinate and Y coordinate, and let's just make the diameter as a variable as well. So if you notice, all I'm doing here right now at this point in time is that I have only declared variables. Now in our setup function, we are going to start assigning initial values to them, right? Something that we kind of know of, right? Let's do our random function here and give it a certain kind of value, and then I can just be lazy about it and try to use that. Okay, and then what about diameter? Let's call it initially as 100. Okay, and then what we need to do here in this one is that in the draw function, I need to create a circle, right? And in the circle, I need to use these variables, right? X and Y for the position and diameter to set the diameter of it. So obvious. Okay, so now it's created here, but of course I haven't used our speed variables, which is why it's kind of just hanging in there. So the most easy shortcut version that we know of is that we can add and assign a certain value for it to start working. All right. So, and now we can see that it's kind of leaving a trail. So, and that's happening because our background is not working. So if we do that, and because it's kind of moving everywhere. Okay, so it's between -2 and 2, so that sometimes you see it going backward and forward. Anyway, so it has started moving, right? Now it's out of our visible canvas, but it's kind of there. You can always refresh it, but we don't need to worry about that. All right, so what we have done is here right now that we have created a circle that kind of moves by any random value between -2 and 2 for X position and for Y position as well. But let's just try to have some more control where we can, so let's try to do something with it, make it a bit more interactive, right? So what we can do is, if we can think about it. So if our circle moves a certain distance away from our mouse's position, we can try to call it back where our mouse is. So that's one thing. So think about it. If we are trying to do something like that, we need to do a couple of things. First, we need to know the distance between our mouse's position and the actual position of the circle. That's one thing. And then I'm also saying it out loud when I say that, okay, if it moves or crosses a certain amount of distance, then it needs to come back. That means that I'm also introducing a conditional thing inside. So the way we can do about it is that we also know of already is that we need to calculate the distance. So let's just put it in another variable, and we know the distance formula. So it is going to calculate the distance between 2 points, and 2 points, each point will have an X and Y position. So in this case, it's going to be an X and Y position, which is the center of the circle. And then it's going to calculate the distance from my mouse's position. So that's going to be mouse X and Y. So that we kind of understand, right? So let's call that. All right, so we have put all the 4 parameters inside, which are basically the X and Y position of the 2 points. And now to introduce, to use this basically in the conditional, we will say, okay, if it goes, if it crosses a certain amount of distance, only then it's going to come back to where our mouse is. So that means that I've calculated the distance here and I've put it in this variable called D, and then I need a certain amount of distance. So I can say that if D, whatever the distance, is greater than some amount, so we can arbitrarily say just let's say 200, then what you need to do is basically you will make the X position as mouse X, and then you're going to reassign the Y position as mouse Y. Okay, so if it's going 200, so now that you can start seeing is that once it crosses 200, it comes back to where my mouse's position is. First of all, we don't need to put a hard-coded number here, so maybe a good idea is to actually introduce another variable. So let's just say max distance is 200, and then I can replace the 200 over there with the variable. That way, if I change it to, let's say 300, I don't need to worry about changing it in the code. So that's one thing. But another thing that we can do is, let's say if it moves away from, from our cursor, it should also sort of reduce in size. So how can we kind of go around that? That means that if I am trying to say something about the size, I am working with the variable diameter, and I'm saying that that value needs to change. And this value is now dependent on, as long as it's moving away, it will keep on decreasing in size. So that means that I'm also talking about the distance, right? That is going to impact the diameter. So we are going to assign this value here to diameter, then becomes, it will become max dist minus d. So let's say, now you can start see that, it not only comes back to where the mouse's position is, but it also reduces in size as it goes further away. If it is too fast, we can try and make it a bit slow, and that is all right. So now it's a bit slower because it's kind of half. All right, so now this way we are able to do this for one circle. Now, if we want to do, first of all, if we want to create multiple circles, how are we going to go about it, right? Now, this is something that we know of, and that's where our arrays come in, because we are going to be talking about lots of variables for each of the circles that we create. All right, so first of all, we will actually turn our variables into arrays. So that's the simplest version of things, right? So let me try and copy it here just to make it faster. So now what I've done is that instead of talking about one variable each, I have created all of these into, declared them as arrays. So now currently they're all empty. The second thing is that I need to actually initiate, I need to initiate them here as well, right? But again, I cannot initiate them individually, right? Because why? Because remember, our arrays, our for loops and arrays are really good friends. So if I want to do that, I need to go through this whole iteration, right? So it's going to do as many as we want to create them. So what do we need? Our for loop, and we are going to put all of these things inside. Why we are doing it in the setup? Why? Because we have right now declared empty arrays, and we need to assign them values, right? So I'm going to put everything in our for loop. And in that, I will, well, this is not the most organized way of coding, but organized in the sense in terms of indentation, not otherwise. Okay, so let's just say let I is 0, and then I is less than whatever number of circles that we are thinking right now. So again, let's make it another variable here. Let num, I don't know, let's start with 100 circles at this point in time. So as long as I is less than num, I plus plus, right? And now that we've created here, we can actually pass on our variable that we have created, and we will use this to assign initial values to all of these empty arrays. Okay, so we have done that for this. Technically for diameter, it doesn't make sense because later down the road, we have already reassigned diameter's value, but it's okay. We will leave it at that, starting to initialize a certain number to begin with. And I don't know why this keeps on happening, but let me exit it and refresh it so that it doesn't bother us later. And if it does, then I'll refresh it again. All right, so okay, that's that. Now that we have already assigned values, initial values in our setup function, what we need to do is we need to actually do that for our within our draw function as well, so that it can actually start working. And for this to work, think about it. What exactly do we need to do? We need to, okay, first of all, just one thing before we kind of do that, I've kind of going back and forth. But let's say what we have done is we have turned all of these into arrays. We have assigned each of these arrays some values, and now let's turn all of these things here into arrays as well, which means multiple of variables. So first things first, I need to create a loop here as well, right? I'm going to put all of this thing inside. And then I will try and see where all we need to pass on these variables. So I'll do let I is 0, I is less than num. You're going to do I plus plus, right? But then I need to pass on these and turn it into arrays. So I will do an I thing here. And I am going to change all of these variables A into array so that it can start working for speed as well, for X and Y position too. And then some similar thing would actually work for when we're passing it on into our circle as well. Okay, so far it looks like, okay, so we are talking about the distance here. We are calculating this. I'm going to format this for a second. All right, so this kind of works. Technically, this should be working. What exactly am I missing here? Max this minus this plus equals circle. Let us see. Again, our console, it's not telling me, is it, okay. Oh, right. So here, this was super helpful. So here I'm missing out this in the distance. So I can literally, I did not turn this into variables. Of course, it wasn't passed through, so it was an error. So see, our console always gives us helpful information. All right, so now what's happening here is, as you guys can see, that we have like multiples of these circles happening, and they are all sort of, I know it's kind of like a little bit sort of looking a bit slow and glitchy, but that's also because of my hardware. Again, remember, our limitation is also how much our hardware can support that. So sometimes it can look faster or slower. I don't know. Maybe if I do it 50, would that look faster? It's sort of faster. Okay, so let's just keep that for now. Anyway, so again, remember how handy it is if we are actually doing it in the variable. I didn't need to change it at all in the code. Okay, so this was something that you kind of know already, right? Now going back to like why we are actually going to create a function out of it and how is that helpful. So think about it. Now I've created all this like one set of circles, and it has certain sort of properties that are sort of working in the draw function. But what if I wanted to change a few things? So let's just say if I created a stroke as gray, right? Or maybe I said no fill. I'm just putting it out there. So what's happening right now, if you think about it, it's I can only do it for like do it once. But let's say if I wanted to have, I want to reuse this set of code, right? But maybe one, I want to have like these outline circles. Maybe I can change properties and I want to have another filled version of it, and God knows what. So how can I kind of do that? Writing it again and again is not a very efficient way, right? That we all know. So that's where our functions come in handy, because we can reuse our certain chunk of code. Okay. We can actually, okay, let me also put it, okay. There are two ways we can go about it. We can literally take this entire chunk of code, which is creating our bunch of circles, or we can sort of divide it as well so that one is performing one thing and the other is another. What does that mean in this case? I'm saying is that if you look at it, that from this point till here, like here when we can see, it is controlling the entire movement of all the circles at this point in time, right? And this circle is where that they are actually being drawn, right? So maybe we can actually put them separately. So right now, let's just not do a fill function. These are quite like bubble sort of effects. So we are going to create our function. So what is the syntax of creating a function? This is something simple, exactly the way that we can see it in our draw or setup thing. So what we will say is we are going to say function, explicitly saying that, then we are going to give a name. Remember, the way we were actually thinking about in variables as well, that we are not going to use the name of the variable which already pre-exists in P5. Similarly, we cannot use the same name for function as well that already pre-exists as a function's name in P5. So we have to be just, mindful of that whenever we are giving names. As long as the names are kind of clear enough for us to understand what's happening in the code, so that even when we come back to it later, we understand it, that's helpful. And if not, you can always leave notes. It's totally your call. So let's call one function where the movement is happening. So let's call them move bubbles. You're going to put parentheses right next to it, and then you're going to put the curly brackets. Just exactly the same way function draw happens, right? We have function draw parentheses and then curly brackets, and within those curly brackets, all the sets of instruction or lines of code reside. Similarly, this is going to happen as well. The only difference is that this is something that now we are creating. So if you look at it, okay, we are talking about this line, these lines of code, right? So I'm going to literally pull this out and I'm going to put this inside here. The difference is that I need to wrap it in our for loop, okay? Something that I can copy it and then reuse it. So doing it here, and then I'm going to do it here. And then I'm going to format it just so that it's a little bit cleaner. Okay, so now all my move bubbles thing reside in this one. The difference with function is that you can see that it has become static. Why? Because we are definitely calling it to happen, but then remember the way the instructions work is that it goes from top to bottom, right? Because it's reading all lines of code. But remember, when we started working with events, that was the same thing, because if we would have called, let's say, mouse press function or something like that, it would actually trigger and look for that function and perform it. So it has the opportunity to kind of jump from those lines of instructions, jump to a point where this function resides somewhere in the code, follow all the set of instructions within that function, and then kind of come back to from where it stopped. So this gives some sort of flexibility. So now this function resides outside of our draw function. That means that if we want it to be working, we need to call it in our draw function. So what we will do is, like, literally, if you notice that if I call move bubbles here, it has started working again, right? Because what I've done here is I've put all the instructions. I've called out here, literally, go to this function and perform whatever the set of instructions are in there, and then come back. So that's what it is doing. So it started initiating all the moving thing and everything, and now it's kind of performing this afterwards. Remember, when we are giving the name of the function, we have to literally say function, name, parentheses, and curly brackets. But when we are calling it in our draw function, we don't have to do this. We are only going to use the name with the parentheses. So that's an important thing for us to remember. Another thing that we can easily and interestingly we should do is, if we want to kind of customize it later for us, is that we can give another function. Let's call it draw bubbles, right? Because that's what exactly is happening when we are drawing it here. So now I can literally remove this, put it inside. It is still within our for loop. It should work, but again, it will stop moving. Why? Because we are calling a move bubble. So there's some sort of movement happening, but for what? It's not being drawn on the canvas. We can't see it. So we are now going to call our draw bubbles function. Okay. So now you can see that our code kind of works, right? Because we have removed them from our draw function. We have made them as separate functions, and we are now calling them in draw. Okay, now how can we sort of like use and reuse it? Like, why is it making our code? How is it making our code efficient? So remember when I was giving like these kind of set of instructions, it was sort of only working for one chunk of circles that we had created. Now what we can do is that we can make it separate for, and we can call these functions as many times as we want. Remember how we were creating one circle initially when we started doing our very basic drawings? We could literally call rectangle as many times as we want, but we could, personalize it, or we could create as many circles as we want, and we could say, okay, maybe one circle needs to have a color, maybe one circle needs to be no fill, one could be have a thicker stroke weight, etc., etc. So we were able to personalize all those things. Similarly, something that we can do with this. The difference with this is, well, move bubbles is something that we are not making any kind of change, right? It's kind of moving. We have already set the parameters of how it will move. So we are not going to keep calling it again and again. It will work for all the times that we are working with the draw bubbles. So let's just say for our first one, and I'm going to remove it from here. Let's try to do this here because again, okay. So I'm going to comment this out. So the first one we have this. Let's try to create another one. I'm going to literally copy paste and then make changes to it. Right, so maybe instead of this, I can give it a value 255. Oh, sorry, not the stroke value. Maybe I can make it, okay, no stroke. And then I can fill it with white. So now you can see suddenly, okay, maybe this is not so much visible. Maybe I can change the stroke weight so that the outlines become a bit more visible. So now what's happening is you can see like a really big blob or chunk of like circles and bubbles happening together, and now you can see them. And the way the code is organized, right, because the first one with the gray stroke is happening before, and then it is overlaid on top with the bubbles which are white in color without stroke. So that's why we are only seeing the outlines thing, because one thing is on top of the other. So that way we can create like different kind of effects literally. If you want to make it like see how it kind of works, you know, now you can see it's like a little different. If I make it a bit less, maybe it would be, yeah, so it's kind of different, right? So now what you can do is you can create multiples of them and you can control them. Also, interestingly, think about it. Maybe one I want, maybe if okay, so the mouse X and mouse Y is something which is already part of our movement of our bubbles, but think about it. Maybe if I want to change a little bit of the position, but how do I do that? Maybe an interesting way is that I want to draw a bubble, but maybe I want to play with the translate function. So I can, and now I'm just like randomly saying 0.5 into mouse X and 0.5 into mouse Y. And let's just keep it separate so it's not impacting anything else if we, you know, end up doing more. So now you can see that you can clearly see the distinction between two of them being created. One has the center, which is the gray one where the mouse X and Y position is, but the white one that we have now created has moved further 0.5 of mouse X, which is basically half of mouse X, right? So the position is a bit more offset, remember, because translate is cumulative. So it is already being used as a mouse X position, and then it's going to move further half of that position. So now you can see two of them happening, but both of them are somehow tied to the mouse's or the cursor's position as well. So, you know, you can literally play around, customize them without writing these lines of code again and again. You can call these functions and then sort of customize it. So yeah, I mean, this is circle one example that you can see. You can create any kind of objects, use your existing knowledge of arrays, variables, loops, existing functions, shapes, and all that exist in P5, and create your own set of instructions within the function, and then call them when you need them and place them wherever you want. So yeah, try and see what you guys can, you know, just explore. I'll see you in the next video.